Welcome to All Grit, No Quit, the show where we dive deep into comeback stories, resilience, and the fight to push through when the odds are stacked against you. Each episode, we sit down with the warriors from all walks of life who have faced the fire and came out stronger. You ready? Let's dive in.
Welcome to All Grit, No Quit, where we spotlight stories of courage, resilience, and bold decisions. I'm your host, Tyson Lawrence, and today's guest is JD Gravina, head women's basketball coach at Western Illinois University. JD took a leap that many would consider crazy. 6 months out of college, he quit his computer engineering job to coach high school girls basketball. But that bold choice set him on a path that, through the ranks of coaching, ultimately leading to his role at Western Illinois. His story is about chasing passion over comfort and the grit it takes to see that decision through. JD, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Tyson.
Yeah, man, we were talking a little offline here, but we have a mutual friend in Trey Griggs, and so he kind of put me onto your story and told me more about you. So I'm just honored that you come on and tell it here on our show.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to be on. Trey probably told you I love to hear myself talk, so it makes me a good podcast guest. But no, it's actually sometimes good to think back about my story because, I've been at the Division I level now for 15 years. So it's a good reminder of kind of how I got into it and my beginnings and why I got into it. So I do like talking about that part of the story.
Absolutely. Yeah, it kind of inspires people, especially, when they're starting out in their career or they're kind of stuck in something, to kind of hear somebody's full length and not just where they're at now. So let's dive into kind of your background and where you're from and kind of origin story. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I'm from Kansas City, Missouri, so go Chiefs, the original Chiefs fan. But I grew up just in a sports family. My dad was a high school girls basketball coach, so it was kind of in my blood. I grew up going to his practices and, being a manager for his team at times and listening to the conversations between him and my mom after the game. And so sports was definitely a big part of me. And I grew up kind of playing every sport. Loved baseball as a kid, basketball, of course. Got into tennis a little bit and actually became my best sport. So I always had the struggle of basketball is my favorite sport, but tennis is my best sport. Never really wanted to get into coaching growing up. But it was weird because a lot of my kind of kid jobs were teaching tennis lessons or coaching a little bit. But I, had my mindset on being, like you mentioned, a computer engineer and an insurance actuary. I was a math, computer science major in college. So graduated from college and got that job I wanted. It was a great job. All my friends thought I was richer than them and I had, this great job. It's always listed as like one of the top 3 jobs,
Right.
They come out with their list. And did it for about 9 months and just, quickly realized that the office world wasn't for me and went back to graduate school, not really knowing what I would do. And started coached tennis actually at the college level a little bit. And then when I got my first job coaching women's basketball and girls basketball, I just knew immediately it was what I wanted to do. I mean, from the first 2 or 3 days of doing it, I knew that's what I wanted to do. And so I look back to that upbringing, being around my dad and him coaching girls basketball and realize, sometimes it's what you're meant to do. And that's kind of how I got my start.
Yeah, you can't deny that coach in you, and especially when you're raised in that environment, right? You just kind of seeing it. I was raised by an educator, right? So it's kind of, I have some of that in me now, and I honestly believe that's kind of what forms you early on. But after those first months of college, what led you to the computer engineering job in the first place? Like, were you always interested in technology and stuff?
Yeah, I was always just, math was kind of my thing. My dad actually was a math teacher as well. He taught calculus and taught some physics. So I was just always kind of in that left brain, I guess, world. I wasn't a great student in high school, but I was really good in those areas. And then when I got to college, I became a really good student overall. But I just enjoyed the problem solving side of it. I loved coding and how black and white it was. You push run and it works or it doesn't, or it works right or it doesn't, and problem solving. And I kind of like the math piece of it again. I think just kind of the objectiveness of those. And, really I thought maybe money was going to be more important to me than it ended up being. Not that money's not important because
Sure.
I think there's something about having that comfortable lifestyle, but and just getting what I thought was a really good career path and a really good job. And so that's what drew me to that. And it took me, getting into it for a while and giving it a good chance to realize that I had something else in the cards.
So what was going through your mind though when you made that decision? I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, I was scared.
At a young age, it's kind of a big move.
It is. And especially when you have probably 90% of the people in my life thought I was absolutely crazy.
Right.
Maybe thought I was being lazy, which actually it was probably the opposite. I think the lazy thing would be to just go have this great career. You're going to be financially stable. The job, you didn't have to take a lot home. It wasn't really very stressful. And so I think that it was actually the opposite of lazy. But yeah, I think that people that knew me, and I can be kind of a free spirit. So I thought like, he just doesn't like going to work every day. And, and that maybe it was kind of a deadbeat decision. I moved back in with my dad. I will tell you now, I've talked about my dad 3 or 4 times on this, but he was the most supportive person about it. I think he understood me. I think he used to question me wanting to be a computer developer and actuary from the get-go, but he kind of let me follow that path. And I needed his support. I mean, like I said, moved back in, I sold my car. He helped me buy, an older car, and just had to kind of make all those sacrifices and kind of encouraged me. So it was scary. And I didn't have a master plan. And my master plan was not to be a Division I basketball coach, or at that point, even to be a basketball coach. I really didn't know what I was going to do. At one point, I thought about going into politics, which is crazy because I dislike politics now. But
Right.
I was just kind of looking for something, I think, with a little bit more purpose, a little bit more human interaction.
Yeah. No, I could see that. And I bet you your dad was proud, and you need those kind of people in your corner that, especially, going into coaching at that level, that it is a big financial, decision, and, kind of like, okay, I'm going to grind through this for a while and whatnot. So
my
you got
first
to
coaching, my first coaching job paid $2,000 for the year.
Right.
Part-time assistant women's basketball coach at Williamsville College. So, I got used to it. And even honestly, my first 2 or 3, even when I was a full-time college basketball coach at McPherson College, I was making about 40 grand, and which was plenty for me, and I was enjoying it. But yeah, I didn't necessarily get into it for the financial piece.
And that's the right thing to do. So what fears did you kind of wrestle with though internally while you were making that decision? And I'm sure there was probably a little bit of self-doubt along the way in those first couple years.
Yeah, I'd say a lot of self-doubt for sure. Really all the way through, I would say really until I got a Division II job, at Quincy. That's why I kind of felt like I made it. But yeah, when I was a high school basketball coach, I mean, I was from Kansas City. I went to the smallest town I'd ever seen. I mean, I remember calling my dad when I came for the interview. I was like, you won't believe this, but the parking lot's gravel. Like, I just couldn't believe that the parking lot was gravel at this school. And I mean, smallest town, the Putnam County Midgets was the name was the mascot of the school, if that gives you an idea. And so, I mean, it was almost daily where I was kind of like, what are you doing? Like, is this, but the weird thing was I was loving it. So I'm like, am I just doing this because I'm selfishly getting so much like personal gratification from it? But of course, in the end, I realized that was a good thing. But it was just constant, like, is this the life that I should have chose when I could have, again, had this great career? And then and then when I got my first college job and realizing how hard it was, I always wanted to be a college coach. That was one of my goals.
Right.
Then I realized how hard it was to go from high school to college and how there's hundreds of people that want to do it, for every 1 or 2 that does. And then to get kind of caught in that NAIA world, which is a tough world to kind of raise up from, if you know much about the college sport industry. So there was just almost that constant, like, can I make it? Did I make the wrong decision? Am I being irresponsible for my future? And luckily it worked out. I mean, I do think luck was probably a little bit part of it.
Yeah, fortunate, and you kind of put yourself in those, positions to be lucky. What was the hardest part about taking that leap? I know you kind of touched on a couple things.
I think a lot of it was just kind of the social aspect of it. I mean, I actually, I had a really serious girlfriend at the time, right when I quit, and we broke up, and she didn't break up with me because I quit my job. But I think there was a natural, like, we were kind of headed towards the future, and now I was, taking a complete exit. And so It's funny. I remember we broke up, and then I broke a small bone in my foot, which I'm a very active guy. So that like drove me nuts. It was like 4 to 6 weeks of, being in a boot, not being able to do stuff. I remember driving down the highway, and I was in this old Jeep Wrangler with the top off, and it just started pouring down rain. I can remember I was listening to John Mayer's song "Why Georgia Why" and just like almost crying, just raining. I mean, it was like, it was just like all-time bottom, and it was just, yeah, you kind of had that feeling like, is my world just falling apart? And all cause self, caused by my own decisions. But really, that it didn't last very long. That feeling didn't last very long. I still remember those few weeks where it was just such a struggle of feeling like, I'm moving on from my other group of friends that kind of all had career jobs and everything. And again, I was moving away. And, at that point, I wasn't at all focused on maybe having a family one day, because if I had already started a family or was close to that, I'm not sure I could have made that leap or would have made that leap.
Yeah.
So I think, again, with the timing, I got kind of lucky. But so that wasn't a fear, but I think in hindsight, it could have been.
Yeah, it's profound. When you get into those moments, right, where you remember those things, like those little snips of like, what am I doing here? It's all crashing down. But I find that the most successful people and the grittiest people are the ones that push through that, and they don't succumb to that. And, they just, but then they always remember that, and that kind of drives you as you're moving forward. So those early years of Putnam County, which were you guys the fighting midgets or was just the midgets?
That's a great question. I don't think we had a ton of fight in us, to be honest with you, but
So and we kind of were touching on this, but what did those early years teach you about grit and perseverance?
Yeah, I mean, I actually really liked the grind of being in kind of I don't know, maybe a forgotten place, right? Mm-hmm. Very rural northern Missouri. And doing it for the right reasons, right? There was actually better media coverage up there than you would think, but you weren't obviously doing it for the media coverage. Or again, I came to that reality of, yeah, I want to be a college coach, but my life may be coaching small town high school basketball and teaching. I think that took some grit of almost not giving up, but not knowing of what type of goals you're going to accomplish and really being where your feet are. And right. I did that, and I just really enjoyed it. I think I was lucky. I had a couple really good friends there. The boys coach, Travis Evans, I became really good friends. And actually the band coach and I became like best friends, which is funny. When I got there, the boys coach, I was like, hey, is there any people that we'll be friends with, young people? And he was like, oh, yeah, the band coach. He's really fun. He's a great guy. And, here I am thinking to myself, like, oh, great, the band coach, my best bet. And then we ended up still to this day our best friends. So, I just kind of really, really leaned into that. And I enjoyed the small town culture. I enjoyed the social life of it. We'd get a Casey's pizza and go sit out on left field and watch the softball game. And so I think that, like, that was just really like a part of almost letting go of, that I have to be chasing this future goal and just really trying to enjoy what I was doing and really realizing that that's what I had chosen to do. I was maybe having a little impact on some young people, both as a teacher, even though I was just a PE teacher, but you can have an impact as a PE teacher and as a coach. And then enjoying that aspect of it and maybe being with that realization that if this is my life, I'm happy with it.
Yeah, you can have a lot of impact at that high school level. Really, there's certain people. I know my story goes back to my dad. It impacted his life, it impacted my life, and I'm still in touch with high school coaches and mentors, and it kind of really allowed me in my future to trust, mentors and coaches in my career as I go on. So, do you look back at the simplicity of that time and just like now, because being a D1 coach is a far cry from the simplicity of those early days. Do you, kind of have some nostalgia for that at times?
Yeah, I absolutely do. And I think a lot of that really formed who I am now. I would consider myself a small town person now, which again would shock me if I had told my 20-year-old self that. So I appreciate it. I really appreciate the more rural lifestyle. And then, yeah, just the simple times of where, there's a real pureness to high school sports.
Right.
There was no money involved. Now it was again, small community where the whole community would come out for games, and the girls basketball team had a really good reputation. We were good. So that was kind of fun to feel that sense of community, because you don't get that as much in a big city.
Right.
You do a little bit, but not where the whole town, you go to the grocery store the next day and people, hey coach, great game, love this, should have called the timeout here, should play zone defense. I mean, it was almost like Hoosiers, where you had
Yeah.
the guys at the barbershop telling you what you need to do. And boy, I loved it. You are exactly right. I love the nostalgia of that. I love the purity. And again, it's something, and I even tell recruits this, like I got my start here and then coaching at some lower levels. I do think I've brought some of that into the Division I game. And I think it's really helped me, especially with my enjoyment of coaching Division I, when you have all this craziness with NIL money and the transfer portal and everything, trying to still kind of find some of that pureness. So I think that definitely had a positive impact for me that I'm still using, especially these last few years.
Yeah, absolutely. I love high school sports. High school sports are great. Like I grew up in a small town. Football was big where I came from and all that kind of stuff. And being here in the Bay Area, it's kind of timely. We're doing this interview because we're doing homecoming right now, today and next few days, but homecoming, and we live in a small suburb out here in the Bay Area, but it really has that small town feel where you can go around, and the high school is a big important part of the community, and it really blends the community, helps the kids feel attached to their community and where they're from and whatnot. So I love high school sports, man. So growing from high school, coaching high school girls sports or basketball to leading at the college level, how was that transition? How did you kind of touched on it a little bit there, the leap, but how did you go about doing it?
Yeah, well, first I remember it being really hard to leave. I mean, I just got so attached to that. I was reading some old emails that some of them sent me, way back in the day when you'd email each other. But when I had left, and just that was hard. But I just absolutely loved being a college coach. Again, like the idea that my whole job. Now, I did teach some class. It was an incredibly small school, McPherson College. So I was the head men's and women's tennis coach and the head women's basketball coach, and I was teaching some classes. So I was, but really still the idea that like my whole career could be based on, my whole job was basically coaching, it was just such a dream come true. And again, I was still young, I was still single, so I just had so much time to put into it. I mean, I remember even when I wasn't coaching, I was just up at the gym, and I'd go play soccer with the men's soccer team when they played their little indoor futsal game. I'd scrimmage with the volleyball team sometimes. I didn't have a washer and dryer, so I did my laundry in the big washers and dryers in the gym, which was great. I'd throw everything in one load. But it was just like my whole life was just coaching and interacting with those college students, and being a small school, I felt like I really made some good relationships, there. And so it was a really enjoyable time. Again, wasn't making a ton of money. What I did miss was a little bit of, we got decent crowds, but again, smaller school and NAI basketball. So it's like you were sometimes playing in front of a couple hundred people. And it was hard to go from playing in front of your whole town, feeling like now you've moved up in the world, to playing in front of where I think more just parents and people that are invested in the program. But and then I think just having more time with the players where you feel like you could have more of an impact, I really enjoyed. So I loved those first couple of years at McPherson College. And it was a battle. I'll tell you this, you talk about grit. We started off, I want to say 1-12 that year. And so, again, self-doubt and questioning like, hey, is the job good enough? And, can you win here? And am I good enough, coach? And so looking back, that was my worst run ever as a coach, was my very first, few months coaching. And so I'm glad I made it through.
Tested you right off the bat. I love that. I mean,
I was so dumb, I didn't realize how bad we were, though, I think. I thought we were getting better. And we were. We ended the season going like 7-7 or so for that last half. So we did get better, and that was fun.
Did you find some familiarity, or did you see it at the time of like kind of what you had done when you made the leap and kind of the self-doubt of getting into coaching to now that the next you were having kind of that same situation, just differently?
Yeah, probably. I don't know. At the time when I took that job, again, I really was, when you get that first job, you think you know everything. People say that, like, as you go longer in your career, you realize how little you know, and especially knew back then. And I almost had this overwhelming confidence that I think I probably needed back then, because we were struggling. And, when you're 1-12, but you can get it done, and you're doing the right thing, and you can be a smart coach. Because I think if it was now, I would be like major self-doubt. So I think reflecting back on that time where I had that confidence to know like I could still get it done, even when it wasn't easy, and even when we were kind of struggling, I think that's kind of something I took from that. And yeah, maybe a little bit. I don't know. I get your question, and I think it would make sense to say yes, it was a similar feeling, but it actually wasn't, because I just had this burst of coaching confidence that got me through it, and that I didn't have as much self-doubt. I had a little, but not as much self-doubt when I was there as when I started coaching. So maybe it was because I felt like I'd made it to the college level, so I must be doing something right, because that was rare to do. But yeah, I had this weird amount of, I mean, it may have just been lack of self-reflection too. I mean, again,
Right.
I literally didn't know how bad I was doing. And it was early, I didn't really get a chance to recruit that first team. You just kind of take what you get. And so, but yeah, I did just have some real confidence there.
Ignorance,
Ignorance,
you kind of have delusional confidence when you're in your 20s.
That's right. That's right. That would be young again.
Yeah, I know. Well, to kind of stay in that thread, because one of the things that I've noticed in a lot of my conversations I've had are people talking about that stage of their life, and I know it was huge for me to do, take some of those risks, right, and to take some of those gambles, or, you don't, the uncertainty. I think so many people look for certainty, especially coming out of college. They want to know what they're going to do for the next 20, 30 years, and I certainly did, and I thought, looking back on that's kind of boring, right? So in your 20s, you got to kind of take these jobs, and if you're single or you don't have a supportive, or you have a supportive wife, it helps, but it can also, really, it's hard, if you've got family and friends, around you, influencing your choice to make those decisions. How do you feel about that? What kind of advice can you give to people in their 20s? I'm sure you probably talked to a lot of your athletes about this.
Yeah, it's tough. And I mean, I think there's so many ways to have a good life and have a successful life. And I really do think if I had started a family young, I probably couldn't have followed the career path I followed. But that's not to say it wouldn't have worked out in a good way. However I decided to do it. If maybe I decided to go to a bigger level of coaching and be an assistant coach for a long time, so I could have that stability, because I couldn't imagine moving a wife and kids from Kansas City to Putnam County to McPherson College to Quincy, Illinois to Macomb, Illinois. In fact, since I've had kids, I haven't moved, which is, really nice as a coach.
I was going to say, that's pretty amazing for a coach.
It really is. It really is. Yeah, knock on wood. But and so I think, like, just kind of doing what's right for that situation, for that moment. I wouldn't encourage people like, oh, you got to go follow this career path, and even if it means sacrificing with kids and family. I see a lot of friends that started families early, and there's a little bit of that jealousy aspect. Like, they really, as their kids got older, now they're still young and enjoying things and able to travel more. And I was kind of the opposite. I kind of did everything before I had a family and kids, and I was really ready to, I guess, settle down. Not that we don't travel and have fun now, but everything kind of revolves around the kids and the family. So I think either way you do it, as long as you're kind of true to yourself and true to what your priorities are, I think you can have that success, either way.
Yeah, I certainly do. Yeah, you can. It just makes for kind of interesting, challenge, especially in the coaching profession. When you have a family, I look at these, coaches that they're like military families, right? They're moving all over the place, and these kids, have to adjust, and I think it makes them resilient in some respects.
I absolutely agree with that, and I think it's tough because in coaching you don't have as much say always in where you go and when you go, right? Because maybe you're an assistant and the head coach gets fired, or you get fired, or they do well and they take a new job, and now you either choose to go with them or now you're still looking for a job. So I think that lack of control can be hard for people in coaching, and especially with families. But I 100% agree on the resilience thing, and that's why I wouldn't be scared necessarily to move my family if it was the right situation, because I think that's literally the most important thing in life. Is I tell my kids all the time, this is what life is. You get knocked down, you get back up. You get knocked down, you get back up. And that could be a small knockdown, getting cut from your little league team, or that could be a big knockdown, and when a family member dies or whatever it is. But learning how to get back up from that, I think is honestly probably the most important thing in life.
I agree, and kind of on that same thread there too. I have two girls, and one of the first things I thought of was like, how am I going to like raise these girls? I know how to be, in an athletic boy, thing. But when it came down to it, it was like, I just want to raise resilient girls, and then like, how do you go about doing that? In today's day and age, it's really hard, in a lot of respects, because a lot of the friction in life is taken out. So, I'm sure you can probably see that in some of your, students or athletes that you hire or you recruit. Talk to me a little bit about what has becoming a leader, or what has coaching taught you about becoming a leader? Obviously, as a coach, you are a leader, but how did you go about kind of internalizing that, and making it, who you are today?
Yeah, I think some of it, luckily for me, came pretty naturally. I always felt like when I was young, I had some natural leadership, and it could just be, even when you're out playing football in the playground, I would kind of figure out the better strategy. And I came from a family that I would say was just very caring, and so not that they were soft or easy on me, but just like cared about other people, and so that definitely went into my leadership style. I know it's kind of cliche, but I definitely believe in like servant leadership. My job as a leader for a lot of coaches, especially at this level, it's so transactional, and it's about a lot of times it's about getting what you want out of the players any means necessary, and sometimes that is with fear or stressing the players out to a level that that you can maybe get something out of them that they normally couldn't maybe bring. And I'm the opposite. I believe that I'm a motivator, and that I'm realistic, which I think is something that has been lost because the Division I world is not real life. It's not like there's so many things about Division I athletics that are just really unnatural. And so, I believe that I'm really realistic, and I think that helps our players, and that my goal is to try to help them. And again, that doesn't always mean making their life easier, like you talked about. It's not about removing all the friction. In fact, we don't do that. Some coaches hold their hand, and they get to school and they already have their ID and they have all their documents done for them and everything else. And I want to help teach them to do those things themselves and to learn to be adults. But I do, treat them really well, and I care about them, and I think that would be one thing my players would say about me. They may say I'm an idiot for this or that, but I think all of them would agree that I care about them, and that's kind of, at the end of the day, my leadership style.
Yeah, I love that. So it's kind of so you communicate the value. How do you communicate that value of grit and perseverance to your players? Is it expressed? Is it just through
It
different?
is. It's tough, and I think it's tougher with my leadership style because I am just I'm a player's coach. I'm a confidence coach,
Right.
and so when you do that, sometimes, and I actually talk to them about this, is sometimes I do them a disservice because I'm not hard enough on them. And that's what I struggle with. My hardest thing, the thing I dislike the most about coaching, is playing time, because you've got 15 kids who are incredibly high level athletes, and 7 of them aren't getting to play, and that's hard to not feel like, oh, you're ruining their love of basketball because they're not getting to play. So I think there's so much natural there's so much natural challenges built into Division I basketball that it means I don't have to add the artificial challenges. But I do talk to them all the time about just about resilience, and about how it's all about when things aren't going your way. It's easy when you're on a run. You're on a 12-2 run, and you're hitting shots, and you're getting stops. You're getting some calls, and the crowd's getting behind you. Anyone can play well in that. But what really separates the good teams is how they kind of grind. When the other team's on an 8-2 run, and they end that 8-2 run instead of turn into a 14-2 run or whatnot. And then I think that goes to socially too. They're at an age where, I don't want to say it too much, but like most of my players have a grandparent die while they're here. It's just the age. Unfortunately, sometimes we deal with parents' illnesses. Injuries are devastating to these kids. You get a season-ending injury for a kid that's basketball's been kind of a huge part of their life. It's devastating. So all those things are things that I really encourage them. When they go through those things, I'm talking to them about how they're going to look back and think that this can be a positive, and how they got through it, and how they're going to be better because of it.
Yeah, that's interesting. You hit on that, because become as a leader, sometimes you don't think about it as a business or a coach or whatever, all this personal stuff that comes into an athlete or an employee's life. It's not always about basketball. It's not always about work. It's about family as well. So how do you do that as a leader? What is the mind kind of steps that you go through in handling some of that stuff? Because that's something I'd like to learn from you. I'm I kind of dealing with it my own way. I've had a recent situation where it's challenged my leadership. So I'm curious, when you do get those tough calls and you've got to deal with the player, what do you go through in your mind?
Yeah, it's tough too because, um, it's just they say like the hardest part is dealing with people, right? Whether that's in a
Right.
business, dealing with employees. Same thing for me. Luckily, I have a great staff, which helps. But yeah, when they're going through tough things, I mean, part of it is the back work that's been done. If there's already a trust factor, which I think is important. Um, you know, I'm also realistic that I'm not perfect. So when they have situations, socially or personally, where other people in their lives, do things that may hurt them or something, I can relate to that
Hmm.
with them. And again, just trying to be super, super realistic. And sometimes they don't need just that rah rah cheerleader, right?
Right.
Sometimes they need that person that just is understanding. And, what I do like to do, I find myself often saying like, hey, when you look back in 10 years, here, especially with the injuries, that's one because it is temporary. When it's something temporary, I think that I'm really good at getting them forward thinking and getting them on the path to getting back to where you want to be. When it's something permanent like a death in the family, that's a lot harder, and sometimes that's a lot more about just kind of being there for someone and encouraging them to get working on being where you want to be. I think some people feel like when something really bad happens, obviously you're going to have all these emotions from it, and you have the stages of grief and everything like that. But I think then some people also feel like other people around them expect them to be sad all the time or expect them to hold on to this grief. And that's what I try to encourage them to get away from and to kind of encourage them to move forward. And obviously your goal at the end of the day, my mom passed away when I was 20 years old. And, you know, now and for a long time, I have great memories of my mom. I feel great about our relationship and about the life she lived. And occasionally I'll have, a little bit of sadness on a certain, something comes up or that she didn't get to my kids. But, my goal was to move to a point where, I can be happy and I don't want to feel like I'm constantly, upset because I feel like I can't move on. And so I
Right.
think, when that happens with kids, sometimes it's a parent divorce, which can be incredibly hard on a kid, things like that you want to move on to a point where you can find happiness in life and come to accept those things that have happened, especially when they're more permanent.
Yeah, I mean, you're just really a crucial part of these, young women's lives, really. And, so the role as a coach is so more than just X's and O's, right? And it's really, trying to handle some of these things, setting them up for, future and whatnot. Let's dive into a little bit about the grief aspect of it. You brought it up, and I lost my dad when I was 17, which was profound, and I'm sure at 20, you're still forming that stuff. How did that shape your journey?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess I haven't thought about it all that much. I definitely, I think when you lose a parent that you're close to,
Hmm.
um, it does almost amplify the lessons that they taught and what they stood for. So I feel like if my mom had lived a long life, I probably would have taken a lot more for, you always, we had, especially back then, you had a little bit of the natural, like dad and son, mom
Hmm.
and daughter relationship. I was still close to my mom, spent a lot of time with her. We had a great relationship. But, I think that if she hadn't gotten sick, I think I would have probably been 90% my dad, 10% my mom, or maybe 80-20. But when you lose someone and you think of all the good things they bring to your life, I think she had more of an impact on who I am now.
Hmm.
Um, because I just, I really think back to, who she was. And so a lot of my easygoing, fun loving side of me came from my mom. And I think that's something that actually has grown throughout the years. So, I definitely think it shaped me. Again, I think I was just at a good enough age. I feel for you. I tell my wife all the time, like, man, if I can make it till my kids are, you know,
Right.
22 or so, and how you get through that tough part of pseudo adulthood. And I think I was there, which was nice. I think the core of who was me was already developed
Right.
before I lost her. So, but it definitely, I mean, she impacted me in a lot of ways. Again, whether she had lived, and then I think there's a natural thing with grief of, you know, being in the present and enjoying one day at a time and enjoying when you are here because it was really hard for me when I realized my mom was my age when she passed away.
Right.
And that was a really eye-opening feeling for me that, wow, you gotta enjoy these days of your life. And again, I know that's super cliche, but it is definitely how it made me feel.
It's absolutely the truth, right? And I think you had another thing, you amplify the good things of their life and you kind of use that, move forward. And, it never goes away, right? You just learn to kind of deal with it in different ways. And so I think that probably makes it a lot, your athletes, when they do face some of this stuff, it allows you to kind of get on their level in some respects with the empathy thing. I'm a big empathy guy. Like, I think, that's a superpower a lot of these coaches that they can tap into. Really, you see the best in what they do. So does that, I mean, have you, I don't know, I mean, that's too much, but really when you get into your athletes, I guess not problems, but kind of challenges, does that kind of really bubble to the surface, do you feel like?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny because, well, it's not funny, but in coaching, yeah, there's so much of the game that is affected by, relationships is a big one. I mean,
100%.
if our girls are having relationship issues, and those relationships, again, I mostly mean, like romantic relationships, but that could be relationships with family and friends, and then how they interact together. But so much of it is dependent on that, and it absolutely affects the bottom line of winning and losing. And so anyway, with that, I think there's just a matter of recognition, and that's where I am lucky to have a good staff. I'm getting to that older. I'm kind of an older, I'm male, so I'm coaching all women. So
Yeah.
I like to think of myself. I don't like to be father figure. I like more older brother figure. But
Yeah.
I have a really good staff that I think can kind of dig into some of those things at a more detailed level. But because the hard thing, and one thing I dislike a little bit about coaching at the Division I level, is there's a little more of a barrier with that head coach, because at the end of the day, I'm deciding whether they're going to play. So I think sometimes they don't want to share as many of their problems because they know that then I see how that could affect them and it could maybe hurt them. And so I've actually talked about, at some point in my career, I'll probably go back to coaching at the Division III level or Division II level or smaller school, where you can maybe break down some of those barriers. But that's where my staff really comes in, and I have two young female assistants that are just really great with the players and can handle some of those situations. So, and each kid's different. I have some kids I have super close relationships to where I do feel like I'm past those barriers, and I have other kids that maybe don't want that or don't feel that, and I'm okay with that too. So just kind of understanding what they want out of that relationship is sometimes different than what I want out of the relationship, and I've got to kind of match them and meet them where they are.
Right.
And so that's something I think I've learned to do pretty well, and I think that's important.
Yeah, that's interesting. You talk about kind of the hierarchy or the team that you build. It kind of insulates you a little bit from, because you're getting pulled in a lot of different directions. You can't be as granular as probably at a D1 level you could be at a D3 program or whatever. Talk about that. Talk about building out your team, like kind of around you, your coaching. What do you look for when you're hiring assistants, different roles that surround the team?
Yeah. Well, at the end of the day, I really look for people that have some similar, like, professional values as me. I think empathy is one big one that you mentioned. I just think it's so easy to see out on the court and see things not going well and just think like, oh, this is inexcusable and this is terrible, and then I go out on the golf course and I'm just an absolute mental midget. You know what I mean? Like, if my players saw my mental approach on the golf course, they would never listen to anything I said the rest of the time. So it's like getting that empathy of knowing like they are trying, and they, it's harder than it looks. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
I mean, my favorite quote is the man in the arena by Teddy Roosevelt. It's how about, it's the people out there actually doing the work.
Yes.
And it's so easy to criticize those people. And from a coaching perspective, it's so easy, but when you're actually the person out there, man, it's way tougher, and there's way more things going on than people realize. And so, so building a staff, I do kind of try to get people that maybe have that kind of realistic approach, and that are going to be people that are caring and are good people, and that share some things. And I also, this is terrible, but I like people that have a good sense of humor. For me, humor is like one of the most important characteristics I can have, just as far as like, surface level enjoyment.
Mm-hmm.
And my players were telling me the other day that my love language was making fun of them and teasing them. And, I keep it pretty light, but, I think most of my team would say one of my favorite players, I just make short jokes about her all the time. And she just knows that means I love her. But same thing with my staff. I mean, I want people I can laugh with. I don't have to, I can be myself around. I don't have to walk around on eggshells. And so, and then people that, again, I think can care for our players, and can compliment me with how they do that. Again, none of my players come to me with relationship issues. Like they don't even want me to know where they have, a significant other or not. And so, I need assistants that can, maybe meet them on those levels and compliment me with what my leadership style is.
Yeah, it's important. You build that environment, that community of who you are, and then it translates out, and then everybody kind of, there's that consistency of, players feel comfortable, they get this kind of the same thing, not the same thing, but somewhat of the same personality traits that you put out there. Purpose. What about how does that factor into your coaching? Having a purpose.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to me. It's one of the reasons I got into coaching. And I think, that purpose is being able to help people. I mean, my favorite thing about coaching is having lunch with those kids that have graduated, 1 to 10 years later.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's amazing how much you look back and you have such fond memories. I mean, sometimes I want to remind them, do you remember when we were in this and you were in my office crying?
It wasn't fun.
Maybe we had some, and so it's so funny when they come back to think of, how positively they reflect on the experience, because once you step out of it, you see all these positive things that you got out of it. So I love that part, and that gives me a ton of purpose. And sometimes you don't see that, right away. I mean, playing Division I basketball is so hard. Again, a lot of it's the playing time aspect and just the failure that you have. I mean, all these kids were the best player on their high school team. Most of them were one of the best players on their AU team. They never have dealt with playing time issues. They've never really dealt with not being one of the better players on the court. And so it's so hard to be in it, but it's also so good for them. And I think, when they look back, I love feeling that purpose of how much they enjoyed it, and how much they got out of it, when they're in each other's weddings. And I get to go to those sometimes. My schedule's busy, so I have to miss more than I like. But, that's definitely the purpose. And I think that's a good thing to remember. And then selfishly, I have a purpose that this career has been, people talk about how hard it is on families, and the way I've done it's been a real positive for my family. I think I get more time with my kids than most of the people I know, more quality time around my family. Our administration is incredibly supportive of my family. So my kids come to most practices, and they've learned for the most part to stay out of the way, not be a distraction. But, I love raising them around these amazing college athletes and raising them around the gym. So selfishly, I've got that purpose out of the career as well.
Yeah, that environment, again, we've talked about that environment. I think when you raise kids in that environment, they see dad go to work and have an effect on people. And then, they like sports? Are they kind of...
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do. They're the two oldest, the youngest one's just kind of getting into it, but the two oldest love basketball, and my son loves baseball. My daughter loves football, which is, she loves football.
You're doing something right, JD.
That's right. Yeah. They pass flag football in the state of Illinois for high school. So I don't know if our school ever get it, but she loves flag football. And so yeah, they enjoy sports. My oldest daughter, who's 11, she's like our water girl manager on the bench for home games. So all that's just been great, and they've definitely embraced it. I mean, it becomes part of who they are too.
Right.
And even at school and in the community, they're Coach Gravina's kids, and so that comes with some added responsibilities, which they don't do a very good job of holding up to. But it helps form their identity, and I think in a mostly positive way.
Yeah, I agree. Just being in those environments of, we mentioned this a little bit earlier. My dad was a football official, so I tailed around with him all over the state of Washington on Friday and Saturdays, being the ball boy and whatnot. And, it helped me as an athlete to kind of be in those environments as a young man and kind of see how different coaches coached and, and whatnot. So if you want to be, in that environment, it's awesome to be in there when you were younger.
Yeah. And you talk about that grit and resilience. I mean, they can see and kind of learn from, it's the best case scenario, because they can not have some of those negatives, but they can see from it. So, they've been in the locker room after a bad loss when everyone's crying, or at practice when maybe a couple kids kind of get into it. Not that our kids really fight or anything, but get snippy with each
Sure.
other. They've seen me sit in the basement with all the blinds drawn, after a bad loss or after an injury, and be upset and take a day or two to get over it. So they see all those things and hopefully how to bounce back from those negatives.
Oh, absolutely. That's huge. That's absolutely huge. What if you hadn't made this bold decision earlier in your career? What do you think you'd be at today? I know you kind of touched on it earlier, but let's think about this a little bit more. Where do you think you'd be today? What would JD Gravina be doing, if he wasn't a basketball coach?
Well, there's two things.
Running a tech company?
Yeah. Maybe I would have gotten, really going with the, kind of the big business tech world. But I don't see that because that's just not me. So I think eventually I would have crashed out at some point in that field.
Yeah.
I mean, I just don't think I would have made it. And I probably would have, I love teaching. I think I probably would have ended up, being a teacher, probably a high school teacher, maybe a college teacher, or even coaching at the high school level. But one of my son Dominic's favorite songs is it's called "If I Wasn't Doing This," and basically they asked the singer, like, what would you do if you weren't this big time singer? And he basically says, I'd still be doing this if I wasn't doing this, just at a different level. And so I definitely think that if I wasn't, this Division I basketball coach, I'd probably be a high school basketball coach or a high school teacher, still kind of doing the same things I'm doing, just at a smaller level in front of a smaller crowd and, with younger kids, but still probably, I think, again, it's been in my blood, so I don't think I could have bought it, even if I had made the decision to step away when I did.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how that works out, right? You really, it was a test of what not to do,
Right.
to kind of give you the whole, I guess.
No, you're spot on. Actually, that's important because I tell people that all the time. It was the best thing that happened to me was taking that job.
Yeah.
And realizing right away what I didn't like about it and what I wanted differently. And I think if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have had as much happiness in my coaching career because I wouldn't have appreciated it. Maybe I would have thought like, oh, I could just be sitting in office and not taking much stress home with me and making good money. And so knowing that I did that and I didn't like it, I think has been huge for me because I do reflect on that all the time. And I do tell people coming out of college, like, sometimes having that first job and learning what you don't like is just as important as finding, your purpose and finding what you do like.
Yeah, and failure, right? I think that has something to do with failure. Talk to me about failure, with your players. How do you go about discussing that with them?
Yeah, failure is the biggest part of sports. I mean,
You bet.
it's such a zero-sum game. I think, and that's why I sometimes have almost this fantasy of being a teacher because it's like at the end of the day as a teacher, yeah, everyone's probably not going to get an A in your class, but they could. If you had a really smart class, all worked really hard, they could all get A's. Whereas in basketball, for every game one team wins, another team loses. For every minute one kid plays, another kid sits the bench. And so that zero-sum game is such a harsh reality that you just have a ton of failure. I mean, daily failure. And it's hard, it's difficult. And for some kids, it doesn't really get easier. And sometimes it's good. The kids that are really good at failing, aren't usually the best players either. I mean, you know what I mean? And so there's definitely, I don't want to talk like, oh, you got to just be so great at failing. I mean, the kids that are driven and that hate losing, everyone asks me as a coach, most coaches say they hate losing more than they love winning. And I'm the opposite. I love competing and I love winning and I'm fairly good at dealing with the losses, which I don't know if it makes, I think some of the really highly driven coaches, like the really highly driven players, are so competitive it just drives them nuts to lose. I don't think that's the best thing for their overall life happiness, but sometimes I do think that drives them to be a little bit higher level. So learning to balance that, I have kids that are like that and learning how to like use that as a positive, use that competitiveness, but also focusing on coping with that failure and continuing to move forward. I think that's something that really happens. I see it almost every year with a couple, especially of our younger kids, that just have never had that. And so learning how to cope with that, I think, is something that I could help teach them.
Yeah, because they're seeing it, like you mentioned, sometimes for the first time.
That's right.
They've had so much success, and now they're the next level, and then it brings in self-doubt and all kinds of crazy stuff.
Well,
And
some of maybe they won conference championship, state champions, or
right,
players of the year in the conference, and so yeah, I think especially from a sports perspective, because they're such high level athletes, they haven't experienced near as much failure, and I see it, man. I see it weigh on them, and they struggle with it. And, so I do think it's good for them. And again, that's why I like having that lunch 3 years out, when they realize how good it is for them, because it's hard to see why you're in it.
yeah, you got to put yourself in positions to fail, in order to figure out that chemistry of how to deal with it. And then when you do deal with it, you see the benefit of it when you're out of it, and then you can get better at, because life's full of failure, right? I mean, really, when you look at it, and if you don't develop that skill, it's really hard to be successful outside of sports.
Yeah, and even seeking out that failure, you got people who try to avoid failure, and people who kind of seek it out. And I think, everyone that studies it or sees it, the people that kind of seek out those challenges and that failure are more successful. So I think that's a good lesson to learn.
Yeah, we're talking about it right now with my girls, right? Just trying to understand that everything's a process, and you've got to be able to process failure, understand how to get better, ownership, accountability, and where you can, and do that. And that little kind of formula gets tweaked, and then eventually you get better at it.
Yep.
What advice would you give someone who's afraid to leave the safe path? I mean, you've done it, and you've seen it with your coaching and whatnot. For something maybe uncertain but really meaningful, what kind of advice would you give them?
Yeah, I mean, I love when people talk about betting on themselves. And if you're making a well thought out, and well, I say that my decision really wasn't well thought out. It honestly wasn't. It was instinctive and slightly emotional.
Yeah,
and
it was well thought out for that age of your life.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And it was a little bit of like, I don't know where I want to go, but I know I don't want to do this. And I think that the thing is, and you kind of mentioned this, is like, working your whole life is a long time. And I tell people that in basketball too, because some of them seem in a hurry to get out in the workforce or to get married. Like, girl, you got the rest of your life to work. You're not going to look back and think, oh, I wish I had started working 1 year earlier, and skip that last year of college. So, if you're, I think if you're feeling that like draw to do something, especially when it's more purposeful, I think you kind of have to take that leap of faith and jump. So I guess it's opposite with what I started off with. It really doesn't have to be that rational. You don't have to have all the answers, especially if you're young. I think it's a little tougher when you hit that midlife crisis, like we all kind of hit, and you have a lot more responsibilities. But man, when you're young, finding something and taking that leap, I think is it really saved my life and made my life what it is today. And I'm very thankful that I did. I'm very thankful that my dad encouraged me. My girlfriend discouraged me, but
hey, you need those haters, right?
That's right. But I think that like just being able to take some risks and seek out that failure, and know if I had tried to get into coaching and failed, maybe I would have found something else out. Again, maybe I would have became a college professor, high school teacher, and been on a podcast talking about how lucky I was to fail at coaching and choose that career path. So there's so many different ways your life can go, that if you follow kind of that bigger purpose, and if you're willing to take that risk, I think it's going to pay off.
Yeah, I had this thought pop in my head recently, and it was like, you don't have to be perfect. You just got to be willing to fail. And if you're willing to fail and get back up, then you kind of start figuring things out. I think everybody wants to be so perfect in everything they're doing, especially when you first start out and there's all that uncertainty, and you're like, got to find the perfect job, got to find the perfect place to live, perfect spouse. And it's just like, let it play out.
Yeah. And that's so true and so important with relationships too. And I try to tell my students that, because I think with social media, they see all these relationships that seem perfect because it's the perfect picture, the perfect place, and the happy anniversary. But, being in a committed relationship is so difficult and so imperfect that I think that's a really important lesson, of just kind of trying to understand, again, be empathetic, that people make mistakes, and that when things don't go well, even in a relationship, that's an opportunity to grow and improve and be better off from it. And, I've learned that the hard way as well.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, finally, finish this sentence. I ask everybody on this that comes on here. All grit, no quit means what to you?
Man, all grit, no quit. Yeah, I think it means, I really think that's a tough one. I like that. I love that all grit, no quit, and it means a lot of things. I'm trying to think of how to simplify that into something, but I would say that it means dealing with adversity.
Yeah.
To me, all grit, no quit is when you get knocked down, getting back up. When you have failure, getting back up. When someone, that you're close to does something that hurts you, working through that. I think it's easy to have that when things are going well. And when you really have to have that grit and not quit is when things are going difficult. And it seems like that's been kind of the theme of what we talked about of, dealing with adversity and dealing with failure. So that's how I would finish that sentence.
I love it.
Kind of a run-on sentence. My wife's an English teacher. She'll get mad at me.
That's all right. It's funny. Like I mentioned earlier, I was raised by an English teacher. My mom was, so I'm always making sure my punctuation.
Right.
It gets embedded in there,
That's right.
But no, and I appreciate that, and that's exactly why you hit on so many things. We could go on for hours about this stuff, but I won't take up more of your time. But betting on yourself, getting comfortable with dealing with adversity, and all that stuff is essentially what we talk about here and what I love to talk about. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story, and I'm definitely be following Western Illinois women's basketball now and rooting for you guys. I have to tell you this, which was crazy, was so I grew up in Eastern Washington, and Eastern Washington just played Western Illinois.
Yeah, red turf, huh?
Yeah, on the red turf, right? So I was like, oh, that's an omen here, I got JD coming up.
That is. Didn't go the way we wanted it to, but we got a big game coming up this week with Eastern Illinois, our big rival. So
now that's the Salukis, right?
No, the Salukis are Southern Illinois.
Southern Illinois.
Panthers, yep. So big game for us. We got a good coach, just his second year, and I think we're gonna step up a little bit in the conference.
Good stuff. Well, good luck this year with you guys. When do you start?
We start practice this week, and then we get games going early November.
And so for people they want to reach out or follow the Western Illinois basketball team, what's a good place to do that?
Yeah, we're on all the socials, Twitter, Instagram, just Western Illinois women's basketball. Me personally, everyone says I have a great Twitter account. I don't know. I try to keep it pretty casual and fun and not just tweet only about my team. But so all the socials are a great way, and our website is goleathernecks.com.
Awesome. All right. Well, good luck this year, JD. And like I said, I'll be following along, and I look forward to touching base with you a little bit later.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I enjoyed it, Tyson.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, give us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform and tell us what you liked. Be sure to subscribe to the show and connect with us on social media as we share more stories of every lesson and every comeback. Until next time.